Hello, and welcome to the third in a series of LaRouchePAC podcasts on Donald Trump's Agenda 47. I'm Susan Kokinda, and I'm being joined again with Brian Lantz. Welcome, Brian.
Good to be here. Yeah.
We are exploring the enormous political and economic implications of Donald Trump's Agenda 47. But I think one of the developments of this last week, which puts it very much in the appropriate context, is what Tucker Carlson said after he got canned by Fox's Rupert Murdoch earlier this week. In the first video he put out after his firing, he made a very important point. He said, the undeniably big topics, the ones that will define our future, get no discussion at all. Now, the enemies of mankind have understood this for a very long time. If you can trap people in the present, if people are only reacting to what's in front of their noses, then you have them under control. But if they can discover how to create a different future, you unleash an unstoppable force. Now, Donald Trump understands this, and so do we. Which is why we're doing these podcasts. So in our first two discussions, we've been focusing on the proposals which President Trump put forward on March 3rd to create quantum leaps in the American standard of living by building from scratch 10 new freedom cities, mostly in the lands that have been locked up by neo-imperial policies for most of the past 100 years or more. So the implications of doing this are enormous. And I want to, because we've stopped thinking as city builders. So Brian, I want to ask you, can you give us a picture of what is involved in building a city?
Well, I think as a reference point, let's take Hoover Dam, built in the 1930s, done in 5 years. It was an enormous project. 3,000 to 5,000 men worked on it in any one time. And to build the Hoover Dam out in the middle of the nowhere in the West, you also had to house 5,000 men and their families. And you had to build a town, Boulder, Colorado. It still exists today, a town of about 15,000 people. You had to build a town with hospitals, schools, and so on to house those workers and their families. So, you know, you're talking about with a new city of 500 to 700,000 people, you're talking about several Hoover Dams or 1 or 2 Grand Coulee Dams, to take another example. But, you know, you've got to have a plan. You got to survey. You got to bring in a lot of heavy equipment. You're going to have a lot of different contracting companies. You're going to start, you know, maybe 10 stories down underground. You know, you're going to dig a big hole, or you're going to bore it out, but you're going to, you know, you're going to put in the infrastructure you need, cabling, the big plumbing and so forth. You're going to want to put that in to start with. So that's just some of what's involved. And that, of course, means you got to have a transportation grid. You've got to provision your families, your workforce. You've got to bring in supplies. And you immediately need to begin building out what you can produce there. If you're building in the Rockies, you got a lot of sand, gravel, and rock. And that's what you can build with. We can build with stone, you know, in terms of our city center of museums, scientific centers, and so forth. We can do this the right kind of way, like a Washington, D.C., if you will. So that's I think, gives an idea.
Well, you know, when you're describing this, what just comes to mind is that Donald Trump is a builder, right? Yeah. Before he was president, he built a lot of stuff. And in fact, in the first few months when he was in office, he went to the annual building trades conference. And I think unlike any other politician, he was able to call out to each one of the trades, because he's worked with each one of the trades and he knows what they actually do when it comes to building. So I want to put out a challenge in the following sense, because Donald Trump has put out a challenge. He said he wants people to actually design 10 new cities. He wants a competition to design this.
Yes.
So Brian, I want to ask you, if you were sitting in a room with Donald Trump, how would you make the case that one of the cities should be built in the Four Corners area of the United States? We touched on this last week in terms of the enormous potential there. First of all, tell people where the Four Corners are, and how would you make the case that this would be a place to build a new city?
Well, you're talking about the area of Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico, where those four states come together. You're talking about the southwest part of the United States, but you're talking about the what's called the Colorado Plateau, an enormous area, tremendous resources. The map you see right there shows you the uranium resources of the United States, and look where they are. That's the Colorado Plateau. That's the region we're talking about. So building out that area, taking advantage of those non-fuel mineral resources is the starting point. And that's the viability, the long-term viability of a city is the tapping of those resources. Then you have water. You take New Mexico. You've got the Rio Grande runs from Colorado south and through New Mexico into that region, and out, of course, down to where we think of it as being on the Texas border with Mexico. You have the Pecos River that runs through really starts in the center of the state. Most importantly, you have the San Juan River running west, and it drains that whole region, and that's a major river running into the Colorado River in Arizona. Energy, you not only have the potential of uranium and uranium processing, but you have as well, I'm just taking New Mexico, but we'll talk a little bit about Arizona as well. You also have tremendous oil, natural gas, and coal resources. The Colorado Plateau was the location of over 32 gigawatts of power production starting in the 1970s and 80s. That's all been dismantled, virtually all of it, beginning with the Obama administration and their Clean Air Act and so on and so forth. The point is coal can and is clean. And that coal capacity and natural gas-fired combined cycle gas plants can provide immediate energy for the systems that you're building up for a city. And then you move on to nuclear, small modular reactors, and so on and so forth. So that's some of what you've got to work with. So you've got energy, you've got water. Arizona, you have Palo Verde, the largest nuclear generation plant in the country, 3.1 gigawatts of power, 28% of Arizona's power, but also power for California, even El Paso, Texas. So the capability, 5 rivers in Arizona. So this is what you've got.
It's
so
amazing.
Let's build on this. Let's launch on this. Yeah.
There's a huge amount of resources, some of which we, as you say, we were using with these, I think you said 32 gigawatts of power that have been shut down by the lunatic green policies. All right, so we have a lot there in terms of water, which I think is going to be surprising to some people, given, the extremities of the drought in some regions. But we have a lot there. We've got water, we've got minerals, we've got the potential for a lot of power. So let's take one of these cities of a size of between 500,000 and 700,000, which is what President Trump has projected. How much water, how much power, how much do you actually have to put into building a city of that size?
Well, to start with, just as a ballpark figure, you're going to need 100 million cubic yards of concrete, which means the cement with which to make the concrete, with the gravel and sand and whatnot. You're a city of 500 to 700,000, 2 to 3 gigawatts of power is what you're going to need that city. roughly 200,000, 250,000 households is what you'd be talking about, just in terms of 3 persons per household on average, given the demographics and so on and so forth. So that's about a gigawatt of power. But you've got industry, and we're gonna be ringing this city with industry, steel mills, aluminum, nuclear processing plants, and the rest, iron mining, and all that's involved in bringing that iron down, coke ovens for those steel mills, integrated steel mills we're talking about here, not electric arc. So that's another gigawatt plus, and you're going to be growing this city, and not just in terms of size. You're going to be ringing this city probably with a green belt. So if the city gets to a certain size, you can say, okay, now let's build another city. Let's branch off. But that city is going to be increasing in energy flux density as well. That is, it's going to be moving up, scaling up to more advanced technologies, higher energy flux densities. And so that's going to require more energy. Water, you're going to need 50 billion gallons of water a year. That's approximate figure based on Denver per capita use. Denver's a city there in the West, so we can kind of bounce off of that. It's a city of about 700,000, by the way. So 50 billion gallons of water. So that means reservoirs. It means plumbing, if you will. It means being able to move that water to where you need it, but also store it so it's available. Then there's wastewater that's got to be treated. So this is big. And like I said, you start maybe 10 stories down, building out that infrastructure in the early stages. And I would add, on the plus side, construction is how you train up a skilled workforce. And we need a skilled workforce for the future. Construction is where many young men start their training. And then they move on to machinists, machine tooling, all sorts of areas of specialization. So,
I think that's a really important point, because one of our challenges is, when you take Trump's intention to create a quantum leap in the standard of living, unfortunately, most people, given the culture and the economy that we're in today, the first thing they think about is, well, that means I'm going to get more money. Well, we've seen that just giving people more money just increases inflation, and it has absolutely no effect on your actual standard of living. But the kinds of jobs that you're describing, and when you let your mind play out, you just take one city and everything that you've described in terms of building the city itself, in terms of water resources, in terms of power resources, in terms of the kinds of things you have to build, you see that we're going to be producing hundreds of thousands of productive jobs, which themselves are making our production more efficient, which is how you bring the costs down and how you actually get a higher standard of living. And I think it's really, really important for people to realize that, building a city like this, these are the manufacturing, mining, construction types of jobs that will give you an income, which can actually, a single income, which can actually raise a family. I'd like you to, because what we're doing here is we're giving people a picture of a city of producers.
Yes.
What do we have today? You think of, New York, and I'm not
going to have to transform the workforce. This, as you know, Susan, this is long overdue, and I think most Americans understand this. We're going to have to empty out these skyscrapers in part, we're in the sense that we're going to move people out of paper shuffling. These are good people, but people need and want productive jobs, and they're for the children as well, and children's children. So we've got an overhead like you can't believe. 8% of our workforce or less is actually in manufacturing, for example. So we've got to really, over time, shift our workforce back into productive activity, not just in new cities, but all across the country. And these up to 10 new cities on federal land in the West that Trump is proposing will be absolutely critical to communicating, in real terms, sensual terms, physical terms, this process, it'll have a galvanizing effect.
Yeah, I mean, it gets to the very question of, what an American's identity is. Our identity used to be as builders and producers. The World Economic Forum wants us to be consumers, happily sitting in our little 5-minute city where, you think that things are produced by Amazon or your Uber Eats driver, and you're under the control of those who are in control of the entire economy. So I think what we're beginning to build out for people in their minds is a very, very different conception, not just of the economy itself, but of our identity as citizens. Are we simply consumers? Are we contented cows, which, as the new about to be coronated King Charles once said, the human race is like a herd of sheep, and sometimes you have to cull the herd.
Yeah, living in his brain dead 15-minute cities. Yeah.
Exactly.
There's so much in the West. I mean, the four corners, maybe I misspoke earlier, but Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, that's just one area of the West. 50% of that land is in federal hands. It's locked up. We're unlocking it. But that stretches all the way up, through beyond Colorado into Wyoming. Then you're talking about Montana and the resources and the people there. And then there's the plain states. So all of this, we've only began to develop our nation, really. And
Exactly.
And we can leap off from where what's been built before, including by Kennedy, but earlier through Lincoln and all of that, and all the movement to the frontiers, to master a new frontier in many ways, many domains.
Well, that's it. And I think President Trump says it right on his Agenda 47 page, think bold, think about new frontiers. So this poses another challenge, which we're going to be taking up in future podcasts, which is, where do you actually get the skilled workforce to do the enormous quantity and, more importantly, quality of productive jobs to rebuild this country? So we'll be taking that up in future podcasts. But I think we've addressed what Tucker Carlson said at the beginning. In the sense that they don't want you thinking about the future. They don't want you thinking about big ideas, and we do. So join us again in the future. Go to the LaRouchePAC.com website. Check out our other coverage on Agenda 47. And thank you, Brian.
Yeah, let's build it.
All right. And we'll see you all again in a future discussion.